Hi, my name is Elliot Bridgewater. I'm a lawyer and advocate for the cooperative sector in Alberta and British Columbia and across Canada. I am very interested in the co-op movement and all aspects of it. It's a very dynamic and diverse group. And so we're having a conversation with a number of co-op leaders across Alberta and British Columbia these weeks to explore what co-ops are up to and the relevance of the cooperative movement in the 21st century, and how where we go from here, perhaps. And so I'm very excited to be here with Yvonne Chiu of Multicultural Health Brokers Co-op, which began 25 years ago to support Edmonton's newcomers. Its founding members are cultural brokers from immigrant communities who know firsthand the social, economic, and language difficulties that immigrants and refugees face when accessing healthcare. So thank you so much, Yvonne, for joining us today. Um, could you just maybe introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your experience with Multicultural Health Broker Co-op?
Sure, Elliot. Thank you for this conversation. It's so wonderful to have a lawyer colleague interested in the co-op. We really need our lawyer colleagues to help promote a broader understanding of co-ops. Hey? So everyone, I am currently the executive director. I'll put the term reluctant in front of it. I'll tell everyone a little bit of a story how I ended up with this wonderful organization. Back in the early 90s in Edmonton, public health is situated with the municipal government. And within that public health department, there was a very rebel-rousing health promotion team led by social workers. And this team, health promotions team's job was to scan Edmonton and see what are the subpopulations that aren't doing as well, not as healthy, maybe struggling with some form of marginalization. And I happened to be a part-time colleague in this team and enjoying the work. And I was assigned the task of speaking to newcomer couples who have experience with childbirth in Edmonton. And so mostly because public health is very keen about the early years, maternal infant health, right? So I was therefore a part-time researcher having the privilege to speak to quite a number of newcomer couples about their experience in Canada, basically. And so that's how I began. And it led to a point where I decided I love this work so much, and particularly the founding members so much, I left public health to join them. And then I was assigned the task of being the executive director to interact with the outside world. Being seen as a trusted sister, I was assigned the external relationship work, right? And that hadn't changed since 1996. So I've been really the colleague who has the privilege to tell others about our work. So that's who I am. Elliot, I missed a little bit of the most important part of the origin story. So what happens was when I was assigned by my colleagues in health promotion to talk to the young couples, the result of the findings led to the idea of public health partnering with hospitals and others who care about maternal infant health to recruit and train a group of women to be the bridge between young couples and formal systems, say. And so it was actually the 14 women nominated by their own community leaders joining this training that became the founding members, right? And so those were the women. I love the health promotion team, but these were the women I fell in love with and decided to leave public health to join them in the mid-90s. And so that's a little bit of the essential part of our origin story. Yeah.
Wow. So 14 women were the founders of this co-op, chose a democratic model by which to make decisions and govern the co-op, and set about improving access and brokering access to healthcare for the communities. That's a fascinating story. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happens? Or maybe some examples of brokering healthcare and the kind of benefit that provides to families and communities?
Yes, Ella, that would be my pleasure. In honor of the founding members, I'll share a little bit. You know, the 14 women, of course, not only got trained, they became so close to each other. They were given a chance with some faraway Health Canada funding to do 3 years of work with the support of public health and the hospitals. Hey, when they did those 3 years of work funded by the federal government, it became very clear for them maternal infant health is a good entry to connect with very isolated families in their communities. But what they noticed was it's more than about the content of maternal infant health or even liaising, connecting them to healthcare during this critical moment in life. It's so much around helping them build the missing relationship that they need to really have a good life in Canada, and more than have a good life, come out of isolation and a sense of despair. And so what the women found together, like no matter which communities they're part of and they're serving, they found common themes of what kind of relational work is needed. For sure, the women found they need to be a critical bridge between the mother and the father, with, say, the physician, with the public health department, with the hospital at different time of infant health or pregnancy. But what they also noticed was these young couples need to find each other and create a community together. And so they immediately went to bringing these couples together. Sometimes they didn't know they were just living on the same block, from the same country, or have the same cultural linguistic background. Okay, so our founding member quickly started community building work. And then they also noticed, because they were nominated by the leaders, they also noticed beyond serving maybe 20 or 30 couples, each of them, they could reach further into the community for many more young couples by tapping into the natural leadership and relational structure of their ethnocultural community. So they intuitively knew community mobilizing is part of it, you know, really go beyond one-on-one or small group work. But what they really noticed was, because these founding members at that time still have that coalition of public health and hospitals supporting them, they found that relationship, collaborative relationship with health professionals inside the system, it's so key. When they share their stories of the families with these key colleagues, they immediately say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it. Oh my gosh, I'm thinking back all these years as a public health nurse. Oh, I really developed very dishonoring practice. I didn't mean to, you know, so there was, through the collaborative work, kind of at the front line, we were able to affect change at the front line. But what was also beautiful was, because we had manager and decision makers from those key hospitals and public health, we were able to influence a little bit, maybe some policy thinking. I don't think we actually created any change in policy, but helped them realize how important these women were when there was a procedural change in the healthcare system. And that is around 24 hours discharge for mothers after having babies in hospital. Our founding members were totally alarmed. They said that these women are alone. Their husbands have jobs that they cannot take days off. There's no paternity leave. And so they cannot be alone after being sent home after 24 hours. So we got the coalition of hospital institutions supporting the founding members to do very effective work at that critical moment of change in, shall we say, procedures of the hospital and public health, right? And so they found that all of these dimensions is about building the right kind of relationship to affect change. And they love working shoulder to shoulder, serving humbly the couples and the families, and having collaborative relationship system. And that gave them the idea that if they were to register as a legal entity, they need something non-hierarchical, grounded in the community, and grounded in the principles of equity and justice. And they were so pleased to know that this province allowed community members to be registered as cooperatives, and actually workers' cooperatives. So that's the whole story behind how the founding members chose to register us as a workers' co-op.
This is so inspiring. So you know, I think it's important to maybe emphasize how this is kind of a mutually supportive circle here that's happened. So you've got We got support and funding from the government, at least to start out, the federal government to start out. But that support and funding goes into creating relationships with otherwise isolated families and mothers. And then that support helps form solidarity within communities, but it also circles back into advocacy for those communities, back into the healthcare system, and back into working with civil servants, not so much in an adversarial necessarily perspective, but to inform, right? Inform practice, perhaps practice principles that are already there, but because of just the pressure of practice. Let's just bring it down to an individual level. The pressure of practice for many doctors is that those who are able to advocate in very highly cultural specific ways are able to get more effective care. And if it doesn't happen, if you're not able to make those critical key communication points in a very short time period within a appointment with a doctor or medical caregiver, care provider, then oftentimes you can miss critical components of care, and it can really cascade throughout the care process. So that is really key, that you had some critical early support, at least in order to build this cooperative network, but then it also came back and it actually assisted the healthcare system itself. So you see that mutually beneficial circle in that story that you just told. And I think that's really worth emphasizing, because the public-private partnerships between cooperatives in order to deliver alternative care services are a vital part of the cooperative movement that often we overlook. A lot of cooperatives, and I'm a firm believer in autonomy of cooperatives, but in terms of providing community care and public services, it can be a vital asset to assist public services, public social services, because they're so much more embedded in the community, and they have that latitude and flexibility to go in and form interpersonal relationships and come from those interpersonal relationships, right? Now you've got an organization democratically rooted that can nominate members from the community and have that critical leadership, but also still be in formalized relationships or more formal relationships with the public system. So I think that's an area that it's so enriching to hear you speak to that, because it's something that I think is a critically untapped potential in many places, both in the cooperative movement, but in healthcare, but in other essential services as well.
I want to thank you for truly capture the essence of who we are and what we're doing. Hey, thank you so much, because my whole description is about cultural brokering, the relational practice, as you mentioned, that links community to systems for that mutual learning and catalyzing change on both sides. But what I wanted to also say very briefly is this is our theory. After having been working with so many key systems that impact the health and well-being of our communities, systems are mostly designed to offer services and even hold policies that are more for, say, 70% of the population. The more marginalized you are, the less the system understand and less able to, in their lack of awareness, be able to serve the marginalized effectively. Hey, and in a way, I wanted to share two things. The founding members heard about the social co-ops in Italy. Maybe we didn't really understand it, but what we heard was so inspiring. We heard that social co-ops in Italy are really the conduit between government and the marginalized population, because the conduit comes from the marginalized population, but knows and have relationship with government, with public institution. That we said, that's it. That's what we want to do in relation to government and public institution. We want to be collaborating with them to bring the voices and the realities of the people. And in a way, we extend the intended service and care to the community. So thank you for mentioning that. And I'll tell a very brief story. On a very cold Monday night, we always meet on Monday night at our co-op. I was told by public health colleagues very happily, now that the federal funding is over, we can hire the women on individually into public health as a health educator. So I was happy too. I brought the good news to my dear colleagues in a January Monday evening. And when I said with a smile on my face to my dear sisters, public health is going to hire you on individually, the faces were so drawn and gray. they said, Yvonne, you cannot do this. You got to go back and negotiate. If we got hired into the system, yes, we will have a bit of secure income, but how are we going to affect change? How can we speak about the realities of the community? We will become part of the system, well cared for, but we won't be able to bring the voices of the people. Hey, so they said, Yvonne, go back, ask them for a year. Give us a year, and we'll find the best legal entity that we could become, and they could contract us as an entity. So that's a little backstory that I wanted to share. Yeah.
Yeah, important. It's a critical piece, right? Because we think we have community advocates, but they may be part of an employment system that is within the civil service, and you lose that connection, you lose that direct connection with community. It has to come from community, and that's why it can be such a critical partnership. But you have to keep in mind that autonomy and independence is vital in order to have that voice rise up in a democratic way that is truly representative. So yeah, I agree with that totally. So how, I mean, you're kind of, we're speaking implicitly around this, but I'm interested in how the relationship has both changed with government. I mean, obviously the early 90s was a different time and space for funding from government. And so how has the co-op grappled with changing funding, obviously, perhaps withdrawal funding, I'm not sure, but and built sustainability and resilience within the co-op?
Yeah, Elliot, thank you. We actually stay firm on relationship. So Elliot, as you know, this province in the late 80s and 90s actually has an explicit commitment to ethnocultural community. We had the multicultural, actually a ministry on multiculturalism, and a multiculturalism council, advisory council for the province. And in the city, we have also ethnocultural councils of some kind, right? So that was the golden years. But since then, as you know, the political environment shifted. It's sometimes the word multicultural has become a dirty word. And so we lived through moments where we became a bit more invisible. And in fact, our supportive colleagues inside system would used to say, let's keep quiet about the contract here. We want to keep you guys working, hey. And so I won't name which system, but there were times like that. And so there's been a bit of a low point for ethnocultural communities, literally kind of disappearing for the last how many years, 20 some years, hey. But with COVID, sadly, we are becoming more visible now because all of a sudden people notice that the inequity, social and economic inequity that existed for a long time, particularly heightened by the boom and the bust, and now really magnified by COVID-19, and Black Lives Matter, anti-racism movement, all of a sudden is important again. So we're a flavor that's coming back. And so we are wishing we survived during those years, mostly out of relationship. We actually grew from 14 women to 35 in the early 2000s to 50 some, you know, and now at 2011, we are 128, and we're part of 25 different ethnocultural communities, and really mostly based on very devoted work to build long-term relationships with key systems. Of course, health was the beginning. Then children's services came in, because where else can we find holistic funding for working with families but children's services? And then we work very closely with the education system, and more lately, because of racism, with the police. And so we really built relationship very devotedly with key colleagues inside those systems. And that's how we were able to gain every so often a little bit of expansion in our contract, as they see how strong we are in the community, that we are extending their mandate into really underserved population, right? So that's how we survived the last number of years. And we're very heavily resourced by government at this time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's hopeful and optimistic to hear that there's still some funding available. I'm curious how, a little bit just diving into the model, for those that may be interested in getting into the weeds, so to speak. Just, I guess, broad-based, so who are your members now? Like, could you describe kind of who are eligible to become members? How do you work that process? And then also, I'm curious, you've mentioned funding. So is the co-op nonprofit or a charity, or how have you gone about structuring co-op for tax purposes and
Sure,
other capital reasons?
sure, Elliot. Well, when I mentioned we're 128 strong, the majority of my colleagues are the natural leaders and skilled community workers, right, from those 25 ethnocultural communities. They have the same lived experience as the families and communities they serve. They're very well embedded, but through our collective training and learning from each other, we're quite familiar with the culture and priority of the key systems that we partner with, right? So really they are become the relational bridge to build community, to serve families holistically, and also on a day-to-day basis, interact between families and Alberta Works, families with physicians, families with child welfare. And so majority of our colleagues are from the ethnocultural communities. And as I said, many of them were already natural leaders. They love and care about the community. They were doing it without pay for a long time, right? And have the trust. A smaller percentage of our colleagues are, remember we said that we're linking the people with systems. So we have a team of non-ethnocultural colleagues who really knows the systems well, maybe who are trained nurses, trained social workers, really trained community advocates who are non-ethnocultural, really linking, helping us link with the formal system. And because we were brought into the picture by 14 women, it's an organization that really believe in a different kind of leadership and an egalitarian, collaborative leadership that is, I would say, kind of feminine in its nature. But we have 10% male colleagues who are such brilliant, relationship agents, right? And so that's who we are at this moment. And so what we really in need of doing is actually try to survive this really difficult time and really refreshing ourselves to show how we are very relevant to public institution needing to look at anti-racism practice and help our communities who are more impacted by COVID and left behind in terms of lack of employment. And so this is what we needed to focus going forward. And unfortunately, there's no funding really for that work, but we're going to try our best to do this work going forward. Yeah.
So I'm curious, between the, let's say, systemic stakeholder group that are very well versed in how to interact with the system effectively, and your cultural leadership group, is there a distinction in the co-op regarding membership? Or how is that relationship governed by the co-op, or is that more of an interpersonal and collective consensus-based structure of decision making?
Yes, Elliot, our founding members decided to register us as a workers' co-op. Unfortunately, a workers' co-op is given a status of being for-profit, even though none of us privately get any benefit from it. And so far, we hadn't had any, shall we say, a profit from our work. Right? And so that's a really unfortunate situation because, interesting enough, provincial government and actually the province of Alberta seems to have forgotten that they support community members to legally register as workers co-op, because most of the government funding exclude co-ops from their eligibility criteria. And definitely because we are for-profit, we would never be able to become a charitable entity, and therefore we cannot leverage funding from other sources like foundations, say. And so that's created a bit of challenge for us over the years, but we managed to find solutions over time for that. So it limited us. So when it comes to the different kinds of colleagues, the kind of the natural leaders and the system brokers, we are all given a chance after being at the Multicultural Health Brokers Co-op for 2 years to apply for membership. And there is a process for, being approved and all that. We haven't turned anybody down. We just welcome. We need to meet the legislative requirement of 75% of the workers being members, right? So we are right at 75 right now. And that everybody contribute at least one share of $100 to join as a member and a co-owner of the organization. So literally around 80 of us are co-owners of the organization, when it comes to making major policy decision or critical decision for our organization or strategic moves, we actually bring all 80 of us together and discuss and debate and really use a consensus model. And we thank Zoom to actually have survey tools. So we've been voting on Zoom lately when we had a couple of big decisions to make. Yeah.
Well, that's great. It's maybe it's a conversation we can carry offline, but there likely is a way for the co-op to tweak its structure to become nonprofit, if that is really in essence what the co-op is doing, and that may free up some funding. And there's also some advocacy that we can and should be providing both through my organization, Community and Cooperative Council, and Bridgewater Law, to advocate for inclusion in those funding, because it is essentially discriminatory if co-ops are being excluded. There's absolutely no reason they should be, because they can, like a corporation, be a nonprofit or be for profit. And it really depends on what the legacy of your operations are as a co-op. And if that is nonprofit, then it probably should be designated as such, especially if there's benefits to co-op and member and community by that change in framing, which doesn't mean that you would have to lose anything regarding membership eligibility criteria or contribution or responsibilities or entitlements, but could be so something that we could maybe talk about. And again, this is what we're trying to address is the critical need of professionals, but also just the public, to be well versed in cooperative practice, knowing their rights and knowing how to run and hold democratic enterprise accountable. And so we always go back to the cooperative principles, and then we build from there. And there's a lot of flexibility we can build from that, and we don't have to get so tied up in one branch of what's happened historically. But we do need to go back to first principles, and I would say regularly, because that's really at the root of why we're doing democratic enterprise. And it can be challenging, obviously, because anytime you have democratic decision making within an organization, there's that collective action issue, right? It's not just one person making the decisions for everybody else because they got 51% of the shares. It's one member, one vote, and so you need to mobilize and continually engage membership in the principles and in the practice of cooperativism. So yeah, anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, Elliot, we love you for suggesting, offering help to consider the not-for-profit status. Quite honestly, many good colleagues inside system think that cooperatives don't take care of conflict of interest. They don't understand the convergence of interests and the value of participatory democracy. Hey, cooperatives are the microcosm of Canada, or what we intend to do in Canada, this kind of true democracy. So I so support your kind analysis and your kind offer of help. We will carry on the conversation after this. Yeah, thank you.
Great, and just to respond to the conflict of interest issue, that is actually built into the legislation. So conflict of interest, like any accountability issue and transparency issue, is addressed in the legislation, needs to be disclosed. So especially at the director level, eligibility for directorship. It must be disclosed, so that it should be aired. That all should be aired out in cooperative decision making, and is actually legislated so that it is. So that doesn't mean that there aren't a bunch of gray areas in any community operation, right? Where people have a multitude of interests that they're dealing with, both personal and collective, individual, and you always have to balance these issues. So when it comes to conflict of interest, it's always muddy. It doesn't matter the organizational structure in my experience, but the one aspect that or tool that cooperatives have is that accountability and transparency that's built in. Yes. So I, it's never 100% that you have there's no perfect model, right? But it is, when practiced according to the democratic principles of cooperativism, it is transparent and accountable. So it is built into the law, and I would invite anybody to have a conversation about that and how we can better guarantee that transparency within the cooperative if there's concerns. So I guess just building out from here, perhaps your vision. Talk a little bit about the challenges the co-op has faced, and been able to be resilient through the invisibility of the 90s, 2000, early 2000s, perhaps, and is somewhat resurgent now as the trend in thought has become more focused on racial injustice, for instance. And you mentioned some of the Black Lives Matter and keying in on the racial justice. Is that an organizational shift that you see building the strength of the co-op over the next 5 years, or what would you say is the plan over the next 5 years or vision for the co-op?
Yeah, Elliot, actually, when COVID began, our co-op actually did a very deep kind of thinking, because we realized, Elliot, frankly speaking, for the last 20-some years, we have this naivety, thinking that if we keep working closely with public institution and government, our community members would actually stay well until they find gainful employment. Poverty is a major determinant of lack of well-being in our communities. And so we were naively thinking, okay, we keep the family well, interacting with the systems, and we'll make sure they have a chance to find gainful employment. That was our mindset. But when COVID hit, we realized our community members were the last one to be hired and first one to be laid off, and there'll be long moments of economic hardship. So we decided that, okay, we got to still keep our communities hopeful. Maybe we build up our employment program, which is a small program, but it's so incredibly effective because it's guided by the people whom we're serving, hey? And so we're going to, where the funding exists or not, we're going to magnify a bit our employment support, because that's key determinant of individual and family well-being. But we also notice we focus too much on relationship with systems. We forgot that the families were falling apart. You know, the most important institution, because of the stress of poverty, everyone has some degree of mental health challenges, hey, and couple relationships been deteriorating, more incidents of family violence that hit child welfare, involvement of police. We were witnessing this in the last 5 years, hey, and we decided, wait a minute, we forgot to do the most important brokering and bridging, which is inside the family, to really address intergenerational tension, address the fracture relationship between couples, because the familial capital is key. And then we decided to apply a framework called the community wealth model, which is presented by Yoso, a social researcher, that in ethnocultural communities, we actually have capital that we need to build up to survive and be well. And one thing we forgot, we're really strong in aspirational capital, otherwise we wouldn't be in Canada, right? We have weakened familial capital, but back home, it was so powerful. We have social capital, all the work that we've done in building communities. We have some navigational capital, but not enough, because families are still making mistakes in relation to systems that cause them harm. Calling the police, thinking the police will mediate between a husband and a wife, right? Leading to the husband being charged. That needs to build up. We actually have not enough linguistic capital, not only about learning English by the parents, but help our children be strong in their first language and identity. The linguistic capital need to be built up so there's no more tension between parents and children. We're weak in resistance capital. We all think we have to become some kind of Canadian, but what about the treasures we brought? Our multilingual capacity, the ancient wisdom that we brought from our homeland, the beautiful cultural wealth of music, poetry that nourishes our spirit when we were down back home. We've forgotten about those treasures. So what we decided to do is, yes, we're going to work with public institutions looking at anti-racism practice, but we need to build up our own strength to never forget we're not less than anybody. We're not the vulnerable newcomers. We are people that are multidimensional with strength, with all kinds of capital that is of high value to everyone, not just to ourselves. And we must build up the family sense of strength, and love. So that's how we shifted a little bit our way of thinking. It doesn't change our radical practice, but we decided there's another radical practice to say why we're suffering as the underclass is because we are implicitly adopting a paradigm of there's a dominant cultural way of being, then we, the subordinate culture has no place. We bring nothing, we know nothing. We have to change that because, you know, Senior Trudeau's vision of multiculturalism is really about interculturalism, that the richness that we all bring from different corners of the world will enrich our nation and we'll all truly be brothers and sisters, right? With no borders. So this is how we're shifting our thinking. And there are political messages in it, Elliot. We know we will soon be half of Alberta by 2036, predicted by federal census. We must be strong, we must be clear, we must wake up, we must serve ourselves better and build up the families, build up our next generation, because we are here to be among others, to really bring a stronger, more caring province.
It's interesting your use of the word capital as you know, multifaceted, multidimensional, and comprehensive. So a different sense of economics that is more holistic, and it's a word that we use a lot, and especially within rural revitalization. So when you talk about, you know, being among community, and you talk about you know, being a subclass or having this divide of othering. Just to connect this and perhaps solidarity is that we work with a lot of rural communities that would be conventionally described, I think, as, you know, predominantly white, predominantly Anglo, predominantly of, you know, the older Canadian demographic, and those communities are struggling too, and especially in rural areas, but in a lot of urban areas too. The struggle is real, and it crosses racial and gender lines. And so what we do as a cooperative movement and what we're working on is how do we actually build and keep community capital? And so in my view, it doesn't matter what the demographics of the community are. The community is vital, and that capital is more than money. It is the very kind of vital essence of local economics that needs to be grown. A lot of times locally, but you're right, it comes back to family, and we build from there. But a good start is to start thinking about investment in a community focused way. So when we think about investment in our conventional sense, we often think about the hyper financialized definition of that, right? We're going to invest in the stock market. We're going to invest in Bitcoin, highly speculative. And where does our money go? It goes into the void. Occasionally you can get some back, but it's going other places. It's going out of our community, and predominantly that's where it stays. And so, and we have the technology and we have the resources, and I believe we have a bubbling up of will, where we're recognizing that actually our capital is best placed in our communities. And so that comes from families, and sometimes it's scarce resources in terms of financial capital, but together it can be monumentally community changing and revitalizing. And so I think that's just something, that a connection that I would bring in is that there is a lot of solidarity there. There is perhaps a shared language to develop around community development, and a recognition that economic and community development has to happen everywhere. This isn't a plight of the global South or just the global South. It's right here at home, and it's in all of our communities. And so I really think that there should be a shared sense of solidarity there. I think there naturally is. I think there's some trends in thought that are divisive to that, and I think that's something that we need to break down, because it can be so empowering to create those new relationships that weren't there before, and break down that, you're right, that perception that there's this class or demographic that knows everything and is totally rooted in Canada and is Canada, and then there's the newcomers, and we need to look to them, or we need to look to something else to find our strength. And I agree with you. I think it's already there. It's already there, and it can be rooted in this land together. So all long story there, but just to point out that I think we need to work on this together, and these kinds of interactions we're having right now is so important to developing that shared understanding of what community is and can be, and is, I think, key to revitalizing our communities and getting a sense of comprehensive, just a sense of community welfare and what I should say, agency. Maybe the word is agency, that we we have the power to be able to govern our communities and our local economies and bring wealth to our families. And so I think when we realize that we're not just passive recipients of jobs, we're not just passive recipients of services, but that we can actually build these ourselves. That's life-changing for so many. And when we talk about demographics like men or women that are feeling so depressed, and the mental health that comes along with powerlessness, we realize that we can change that through solidarity, through joining together. And I personally believe cooperativism is one of the more healthy ways to do that.
I so agree. I so agree, because Elliot, my own colleagues would say that after being in this workers' co-op, the biggest gain, when you talk about handling multiple interests, they said the biggest gain is that I transformed. I became a better human being, having been actively involved in a workers' co-op. And you're so right. Cooperatives are really honoring humanity and relationship. Because co-ops in its community development or community economic development base is so much about human relationship. And that's why I believe you are right. We must promote this. And I really feel like I want to add that cultural brokering as a practice. It shouldn't be just us taking it up. Elliot, you are a cultural broker, truly, in your hosting this show, as a lawyer. We need more of us, relational agent, creating opportunity for us to come across the divides, to have conversation as part of humanity. And really, Desmond Tutu had a quote. I don't think I can quote him exactly, but he said, "My humanity is bound out in yours. We can only be human together," right? So co-ops have that kind of unique qualities and structures and promises that we really should heighten during this difficult time when there's such deep sense of despair, where more divisiveness will come when people are desperate. And so I really believe in what you said. Thank you, Elliot.
So Yvonne, I'm curious, in terms of our greater solidarity that we're speaking, in a practical sense, there's our kind of amorphous cooperative community that's out here, and as a movement. I guess, what has your connection been with the co-op community to date, and where do you see any gaps, or do you see some hope? How can we inform ourselves into what we need to do better, or what we're already doing really well?
Sure, Elliot. I mean, we feel so lucky to have been part of the co-op family. We're part of the Canadian Federation of Workers Co-op. We're a member of ACCA. We're a member of the Health Co-op of Canada. So we're members of several cooperative or federations. My worry is, collectively, we have not been successful in helping the most essential stakeholders understand the value of co-op. And I must say, sometimes we feel very lonely. Our heads are down, working very hard. And when at desperate moment we look up, there's no one within the co-op sector, except for ACCA and the two federations we're part of, to actually help us in a practical way. Sometimes with financial resources. We might have a really brilliant social innovation to address poverty in our community, but we cannot find timely resources to do this work. And then we have to struggle with going to foundation government who wouldn't recognize us, and we have to lean on our sister organization to leverage the funding. And it's never timely, it's never enough. We feel a little bit that there's a bit of disjointedness. We're not living up the promise of co-ops helping co-ops. And so I wish, because I feel like often when I'm with brothers and sisters in co-op movement, we have such desire to be like the other form of business, that we're successful, we're shiny and attractive. And often we might have been told when we talk about our work, Yvonne, you guys are doing great work, but please don't keep referring to the vulnerable population. We are very strong, we're successful at businesses. Hey? So there's that internal tension that has to be resolved. I know those comments didn't come in a hurtful way. That was a way to say, we want others to recognize us. Hey? So in a way, we're also stuck in this dominant versus subdominant paradigm, in a way, implicitly. And how could we be strong, be able to help each other, particularly at this moment? Yeah, that's my honest feelings. And I hope I didn't hurt anyone in saying this, but it is the truth. Even though we enjoy such caring, supportive relationship with our federations, but I worry that overall as a sector, sometimes our mindset a little bit not grounded in the principle of equity and justice. We're too much into, look, we're just as successful as the regular bank, we're just as successful, but always kind of pushing aside a little bit the important work of addressing equity and justice, which actually co-ops were meant to do from the start. In our collective relationship, in our solidarity, we're taking care of each other and many more, and no one is left behind, right? That's the principle of co-ops.
Yeah, there's nothing mutually exclusive about the co-op principles and running an effective enterprise. Yeah. And I think sometimes we've lost that. We thought, well, we can't go back to the principles because the principles are inefficient or they're ineffective. We need to start streamlining into more of a harder business orientation and strategy and approach. And it's nice to refer to the co-op principles every once in a while at board meetings, but when we talk about our day-to-day operation, that doesn't need to be part of it. And I would suggest that we can do both, and there's a lot of resilience and sustainability in referring to those principles. The interpersonal community connections, I believe, are what has kept for instance, when we see the desertification of a lot of local economics and communities, but we see the co-ops still there, the credit unions still there. It's as much because they have the interpersonal connections historically and still today in many respects, because of the model, that they become the more obvious and evident foundations of our economy when all the speculative economy leaves town and they're locally owned. So you see that as the tide recedes in the 21st century of a different kind of economics that was highly speculative and saw huge rapid growth and escalation of debt and hyper-financialization. As that recedes, you see the foundations of local economics, and they are cooperative. And so we should be celebrating that, and we should be pointing to that and saying how we already know that this is a strong model. We've perhaps forgotten how we can do it even better when we're together. Inter-cooperative associations, which are obviously is one of the co-op principles as well. So I think it's a timely challenge, Yvonne, and I don't think anybody. I mean, if cooperatives are good at doing anything, and I've been in a lot of AGMs lately where there's a lot of tension, but people speak their truth and they challenge the cooperative, and that is also a strength. And so we should invite difficult conversations, and because that's part of democracy, and we get a firmer grounding in the truth when we bring those different perspectives together. And there's going to be tension. Yeah. So I'm glad you pointed that out, and I would echo your sentiment really that it is a challenge to us, and nobody's at fault. Nobody should be, but it is it's part of a historical circumstances we find ourselves in, but we have this opportunity and challenge of the 21st century to look around and ask ourselves, what can we do to address these existential crises? And increasingly, I think the answer is we do it together in cooperation. And it's a very simple answer, but I think it's probably one of our strongest tools as humanity. So thank you for that. So I'd like to just at this point, I'll point out that we do have a gathering coming up with ACCA. I'm hoping you'll be there. October 26th to 28th is the gathering in Edmonton that the ACCA is hosting. I'll be there, and I'll be having a lot of these conversations, and I believe we'll have a panel discussion that's going to be podcast that will hopefully address some of these issues. And I think, you know, I've witnessed over the last few years the gathering. Well, it wasn't hosted yet last year for obvious reasons, but there is a change in the era. We're talking about kind of together as a cooperative movement. How do we challenge ourselves to rise to these challenges in the 21st crises of the 21st century? Is there anything you wanted to add at this point in terms of what's going on with the co-op? Perhaps how to become involved in it if there are people out there that are interested, or how to start in on their own journey of cooperativism.
Yeah, maybe as I mentioned earlier, having gainful employment is so critical for our community's well-being. So I hope, you know, there will be jobs available through the co-op sector for many of the ethnocultural community members. So that would be very important. Maybe I'll check in with ACCA to see how we could activate that a little bit in our own network, create opportunities, right? And so I think we're looking forward. We're actually joining researchers to understand the role of cultural brokering at this difficult time tied to health and social equity. And so we are working with a team of physician researchers using a very dynamic tool called SenseMaker that will capture our everyday work through micro narratives that's analyzed. And so there are real-time gathering of maybe within a week, hundreds of micro narratives of what's happening in our community and what we're doing as cultural brokers to impact change and strive for equity. And I think through research, we might be able to help illuminate even clearer what's happening in our community, both the struggles and the strength, because we find that our stories is impactful every so often. You know, the voices of our communities are impactful, but it doesn't quite lead to the kind of high-level change we've long desired. We hope that through this kind of technology, we can quantify more significantly both the realities of struggles, but strengths and opportunities, right? And we really look to some help, you know, through our brothers and sisters in the co-op sector to survive, you know, in many ways to survive. And so, yeah, and I look forward to, Elliot, working with you in thinking about us becoming a not-for-profit. You know, I have to, maybe the final message is we have so many wonderful kindred spirits who came along the way, who help us become who we are, hey? I hope to thank Dr. Denise Spitzer, who's a professor at public health, because she's a member of the Sundance Co-op in Edmonton. She was the first one, when she met the founding members, said, hey, Yvonne, you gotta tell these women they should consider cooperatives, right? We have to thank Lynn Henley with Communitas Group. She was the one who guided the women. You remember that year we negotiated with Alberta Health or Public Health so that we could register? Lynn never gave up on us. She taught us all about the different corporate options and really got to know co-ops, right? And we have to thank Mark Goblade, who passed away, who was the, you know, really the founder of the Canadian Workers Co-op Federation. He would visit us when he was alive almost once a year just to check in on us, to say, okay, Yvonne, how are you guys doing? And he used to say, oh, Yvonne, you guys are going to be 30. Most workers co-op aren't that big. Well, we survived. We found our way to maintain participatory democracy. But we thank these beautiful human beings in our lives. And there are many more, countless other kindred spirits and many within the co-op sector. So I just want to say thank you to all of those. And of course, to you, Elliot and Isabel, for listening, and Paul at ACCA, who never gave up on us. So just wanted to do that hokey thing of thanking. Thank you, Elliot. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, Yvonne, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations on this front. I'm so glad that your message was we were able to get this out today, and I hope we can inspire some other community leaders to either contact you or to start their own cooperative journey, or to just participate in their own in cooperatives that they are maybe a member of more proactively, and to explore these creative ideas that you're already invested in. I think that there's so much opportunity for kind of creative engagement with public service providers that you're exemplifying, that sometimes we overlook. And so this is a great message to get out, and a great story. And I really appreciate your time and energy in this movement. It's really inspirational.
Elliot, yeah.
Thank you, and I guess we'll probably see you in October. Yeah, that's it for today. To be
Thank
continued.
you, Elliot. As you would say, in solidarity, hey? Thank you both. Have a good
In
week.
solidarity.